A woman stumbles through a snowstorm, barefoot and broken, clutching a pistol to her chest. Her lips tremble as she whispers, "Just kill me fast." But the mountain man who finds her does something no one would expect. He doesn't pull the trigger. He lifts her into his arms and carries her through the storm toward the faint glow of his cabin fire. As the wind howls and the wolves cry, two souls, one running from her past, the other hiding from his, are forced to face what they fear most. The truth. She's not just any runaway, and he's not just a lonely trapper. The law is coming, carrying secrets that could destroy them both, because the man she fled from may not be the only one who deserves judgment. When mercy meets the gun barrel, and faith collides with guilt, will saving her life cost him his soul, or finally redeem it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled through the Colorado highlands like a hungry wolf, whipping snow into River Hale's face as he tracked the wounded elk's trail. His weathered fingers traced the crimson drops scattered across the fresh powder, now nearly invisible in the gathering dusk. The blizzard was worsening by the minute, turning the familiar mountain terrain into a treacherous maze of white. River pulled his wool scarf tighter around his neck, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 38 years of life in these mountains had taught him to respect nature's fury, but something wouldn't let him turn back. Not yet. The elk's blood trail was growing thicker. The animal was close. A shape emerged through the swirling snow ahead, but it wasn't the elk. River's heart skipped a beat as he made out a crumpled form in the deepening shadows. His legs carried him forward before his mind could process what he was seeing. There, half buried in the snow, lay a woman. Her dress was torn and frozen stiff, her feet bare and blue-white with frostbite. Dark hair spilled across the snow like spilled ink. In her trembling hands, she clutched a pistol to her chest, as if it were the last thing anchoring her to this world. River approached slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing pain-glazed depths that struck him to his core. "Just," she whispered, her lips blue and cracking, "just kill me fast." The words hit River like a physical blow. He'd heard similar pleas before, in his days as an army scout, but never with such raw desperation. This woman wasn't just hurt. She was broken in a way that went beyond the flesh. "No, ma'am," he said firmly, shrugging off his heavy coat. "That's not happening today." She tried to raise the pistol, but her fingers were too numb to manage it. "Please," she begged, tears freezing on her cheeks. I can't go back." "Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go," River assured her, wrapping his coat around her frozen form. "But you're not dying in this snow. That's between you and the good Lord, and I reckon he's not done with you yet." Without waiting for her response, River gently pried the pistol from her rigid fingers and tucked it into his belt. She was light, too light, as he lifted her over his shoulder. Her body was cold as ice against him, and he could feel her shivering violently through the layers of cloth. The journey back to his cabin was a battle against nature itself. The blizzard had erased his tracks, and the darkness was closing in fast. River's muscles burned with each step through the deepening snow. The woman had fallen silent, and he could only pray she was still breathing. Words he hadn't spoken in years began tumbling from his lips, prayers his mother had taught him long ago. "Lord, guide our steps. Keep us in your light." The familiar phrases gave rhythm to his trudging steps, helped him push through the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. After what felt like hours, the shadow of his cabin emerged from the whiteout. River's hands shook as he worked the door latch, nearly dropping his precious burden. Inside, the embers of his morning fire still glowed, offering a promise of warmth. He laid the woman on his cot, positioned close to the fireplace. Her skin was pale as new milk, her lips tinged with blue. Working quickly, River built up the fire and began removing her frozen boots and stockings. Her feet were in bad shape, frostbitten, but hopefully not beyond saving. "Name's River Hale," he said as he worked, hoping his voice might keep her tethered to life. "You're safe here. Nobody knows about this place except me and the wildlife." He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then set about preparing hot water for tea and warming stones to place around her. The pistol he'd taken from her lay on the floor beside him, a stark reminder of how close she'd come to a very different end. As he worked, River studied his unexpected guest. Despite the cold's ravages, she was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with delicate features that spoke of a genteel upbringing. What had driven such a woman to flee barefoot into a mountain blizzard, ready to die rather than be found? Her eyelids fluttered, and a soft moan escaped her lips. River leaned closer, speaking softly. "You're not dying tonight. Not if I can help it." She tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. Elia Bell." "Rest easy, Miss Bell," River said, tucking the blankets more securely around her. "You're safe now?" The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the cabin's log walls. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within these walls, two lost souls had found an unexpected sanctuary. River settled into his chair, prepared for a long night of vigil. He didn't know what demons had driven Elia Bell to seek death in the snow, but something in her desperate plea had awakened memories of his own dark times. As he watched her fitful sleep, River felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He'd saved her life, but that was just the beginning. Something told him their paths had crossed for a reason, though he couldn't yet say what that might be. The hours crept by, marked only by the popping of the fire and Elia's gradually steadying breath. River kept the flames fed and changed out the warming stones as needed, all while wrestling with his own thoughts. It had been years since he'd allowed another person into his carefully maintained solitude, years since he'd trusted himself to be responsible for anyone's welfare but his own. Yet here he was, tending to a stranger who'd begged for death, fighting to keep her alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many times had he himself stared into the darkness, wondering if there was any path to redemption for the things he'd done? Somewhere near midnight, Elia stirred again, her eyes opening with more awareness this time. "Why?" she asked, her voice stronger but still rough with pain and cold. "Why didn't you let me die?" River met her gaze steadily. "Because every sunrise is a chance for a new beginning, Miss Bell, and I reckon you've got a few more sunrises left in you yet." She turned her face away, but not before he caught the glimmer of tears. "You don't know what I've done." "No, I don't," River agreed, adding another log to the fire. "But I know something about carrying heavy burdens. Sometimes the Lord sends us help when we least expect it, and least believe we deserve it." A soft sob escaped her, quickly stifled. River pretended not to notice, giving her what privacy he could in the close confines of the cabin. Instead, he busied himself preparing a cup of willow bark tea, strong enough to help with the pain he knew she must be feeling. "Think you can manage some tea?" he asked after a while, helping her sit up slightly. "It's bitter as sin, but it'll help with the hurt." Elia accepted the cup with trembling hands, sipping carefully at the hot liquid. color was slowly returning to her face, though her eyes remained haunted. "Thank you," she whispered, and River knew she meant for more than just the tea. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, taking the empty cup. "Tomorrow's soon enough for talking, if you've a mind to." She settled back against the pillow, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. But before sleep claimed her again, she spoke once more. "Mr. Hale?" "Just River's fine." "River, I'm afraid." The simple admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. River nodded slowly. "Fear's natural as breathing, Miss Bell, but you're not alone anymore. Whatever you're running from, we'll face it together if need be." She didn't respond, but some of the tension seemed to ease from her shoulders. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep, more peaceful than before. River resumed his vigil, his mind turning over the strange events that had led to this moment. He'd set out tracking an elk, and instead found something far more valuable, a soul in need of saving. Perhaps, he reflected, in saving her, he might find a measure of redemption for himself as well. The blizzard continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, a fragile peace had taken hold. Two broken people, brought together by providence or chance, each carrying their own heavy burdens. River didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, it was enough that they'd both survived the night. He checked the blankets one last time, ensuring Alaya was warm enough, then settled back in his chair. The pistol still lay where he'd placed it, a reminder of how close this night had come to ending differently. River picked it up and quietly unloaded it, storing the ammunition in his chest across the room. Whatever had driven Alaya Bell to such despair would still be there in the morning, but at least she would face it with warm feet and a full belly. The fire popped and sparked, sending shadows dancing across Alaya's sleeping face. River watched over her, a silent guardian against the night's demons, both seen and unseen. Dawn was still hours away, but he'd meant what he said. Every sunrise brought new possibilities. Tomorrow would be soon enough to learn her story. For now, it was enough that she lived, that she breathed, that she had found shelter from the storm. The blizzard showed no signs of relenting. Snow piled against the cabin's single window, turning the glass into a foggy mirror that reflected the fire's glow. River kept the flames well fed, knowing the cold could kill as surely as any bullet. Alaya's fever set in during that first night. She tossed beneath the blankets, muttering words that made River's jaw clench. Even in delirium, fear threaded through her voice. "Please, don't," she whimpered, her head rolling on the pillow. "Henry, I'm sorry. I'll be good." River soaked another cloth in melted snow water, laying it across her burning forehead. The name Henry came up often in her fever dreams, always accompanied by flinching or quiet pleas. River didn't need details to recognize the signs of a woman who'd learned to fear her own husband's touch. He'd seen such things before, during his army days. Wives with shadowed eyes and carefully hidden bruises, making excuses for their men's cruelty. The memory of his own failure to help them sat like stones in his gut. But this time was different. This time he could do something. "Hush now," he murmured, changing the cloth again. "You're safe here. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." Her skin burned beneath his fingers as he checked her temperature. The frostbite on her feet worried him most. Some toes had turned an angry purple. He'd treated such injuries before, but never this severe. All he could do was keep her feet elevated and warm, hoping circulation would return before gangrene set in. On the third day, when her fever peaked dangerously high, River retrieved his old Bible from its shelf. Dust coated the leather cover. He hadn't opened it since leaving the army. But Elias seemed to calm at the sound of scripture, so he began reading aloud, his voice rough with disuse. "The Lord is my shepherd," he read. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." The familiar words filled the cabin, competing with the howl of wind outside. River read until his throat grew hoarse, then soaked more cloths and prepared another batch of willow bark tea. He'd venture out only briefly to check his snares, knowing she needed broth to keep up her strength. On the fourth day, Elia's eyes finally opened with real awareness. She stared at the cabin's ceiling, then at River, who sat mending a torn sleeve by the fire. "You should have let me die." Her voice was raw but carried steel beneath the weakness. River set aside his mending. "Maybe the Lord sent me so you wouldn't." "The Lord," she laughed, a bitter sound that ended in coughing. "Where was he when—" She cut herself off, turning her face to the wall. "Right here," River said quietly. "Working through ordinary folks, same as always." She didn't respond, but he saw her shoulders shake with silent tears. The days blurred together as the storm raged on. River developed a routine, checking Elia's fever, changing bandages, reading scripture when the darkness in her eyes grew too deep. He'd venture out in the morning to check his snares, grateful when he found rabbits caught in the wire loops. The meat made thin but nourishing broth that he spooned carefully between Elia's cracked lips. "Where are we?" she asked one evening, after managing a full cup of broth on her own. "Colorado Territory, about 40 miles northeast of Silverton, high in the San Juans." River added another log to the fire. "Nearest neighbor's half a day's ride when the weather's fair." "And you live here alone?" Her voice carried genuine curiosity now, the first real interest she'd shown in anything. River nodded, not elaborating. The cabin's solitude was his choice, his penance. He didn't need to burden her with those reasons. Outside, wolves began their nightly chorus, a sound that usually brought River comfort in its wildness. But tonight it made him think of other predators, men who wore human faces while carrying wolf hearts. He studied Elia's profile in the firelight as she dozed. The bruises on her neck had faded from purple to sickly yellow, but the haunted look in her eyes remained. No ordinary runaway, this one. She had the bearing of someone educated, probably raised in comfort back east. Yet here she was, half dead in a mountain storm, carrying secrets as deep as his own. "You don't ask many questions," she said suddenly, startling him from his thoughts. "Reckon you'll tell what needs telling when you're ready." She turned to face him, fever-bright eyes searching his face. "And if I'm never ready? Then that's your right." River stirred the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "Ain't my place to judge another's burdens." Something in her expression softened at that. Not quite trust, but perhaps its distant cousin. She watched him tend the fire, her fingers worrying the edge of a blanket. "I killed him," she whispered, so quietly River almost missed it. "My husband. He was coming at me with the poker from the fire, and I shot him." Her voice cracked. "I'd never even held a gun before that night." River kept his face carefully neutral, though his hands wanted to clench into fists. "Sounds like self-defense to me." "The law might not see it that way. I ran, just grabbed his pistol and ran, didn't even take a coat." She shuddered. 3 days in the cold before you found me. I was hoping the storm would finish what I couldn't." "Well," River said after a long moment, "I'm glad it didn't." Elia's laugh held no humor. "Are you? You don't know me. I'm a murderer." "No." River's voice was firm. "You're a survivor. Ain't the same thing at all." She fell silent at that, but something in her posture eased slightly. River didn't push for more, just added another log to the fire and began preparing their evening meal. More rabbit broth for her, jerky and beans for himself. The storm's fury gradually lessened over the next few days, though snow still fell steadily. Alaya's fever broke, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She began asking for small tasks, anything to feel useful. River showed her how to roll bandages and sort dried herbs for poultices. Their conversations remained careful, circling around the edges of deeper truths. River noticed how she relaxed when he read from the Bible, her lips sometimes moving silently along with familiar verses. A preacher's daughter, maybe, or someone raised in the church before life led her down harder paths. The wolves continued their nightly songs, but their howls seemed less threatening now. Inside the cabin, a fragile warmth had begun to grow, built on shared silences, quiet respect, and the gradual recognition of kindred spirits who understood what it meant to carry heavy burdens. One evening, as River changed the bandages on her feet, Alaya spoke without prompting. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for saving me, but for not making me explain everything, for giving me time." River nodded, careful to keep his touch gentle as he wrapped clean cloth around her healing toes. "Time's about all I have to give out here. That and a warm fire. It's more than anyone else has offered in a long while." She watched him work, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "I thought I wanted to die in that storm. I was so sure of it. But now I'm not sure of anything anymore." She met his eyes briefly before looking away. "Except that I'm grateful you found me." River secured the last bandage, then moved back to his chair by the fire. "Well then," he said quietly, "that's enough for now." The storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, something had shifted. Alaya's will to die had met River's steady compassion, and faltered. She wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but she'd taken the first step away from that dark precipice where he'd found her. As night settled over the mountain, River added more wood to the fire and picked up his Bible. Alaya had already settled into what had become their evening routine, her eyes half closed as she waited for him to read. The wolves began their nightly chorus, but now their voices seemed to speak more of wildness than danger, a reminder that even in the harshest places, life found a way to endure. The storm's fury finally broke after 7 days, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Morning sunlight sparkled across deep snowdrifts, and patches of startling blue sky peeked through tattered clouds. The pristine white blanket stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by dark stands of pine and the occasional rocky outcrop. Inside the cabin, River stoked the morning fire and glanced at Alaya, who sat propped against the wall. Her color had improved, though exhaustion still shadowed her eyes. "Reckon it's time you tried standing," he said, moving to her side. "Feet won't heal proper if they don't get some use." Alaya nodded, pushing aside the blankets. Her bandaged hands gripped the edge of the cot as River helped her swing her legs down. The floor felt solid beneath her feet, but when she tried to put weight on them, pain shot up through her ankles. "Easy now." River steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow. "Small steps." She gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright, swaying slightly. River's hand remained firm but unobtrusive at her elbow as she took one tentative step, then another. Her legs trembled with the effort. "That's it," he encouraged, "just to the table and back." They made the short journey 3 times before Alaya's strength gave out. River helped her back to the cot, noting how her hands shook as she pulled the blankets over her legs. "Better than I expected," he said, returning to the fireplace to check the coffee pot. I need to leave, Alaya said suddenly. I've imposed on your kindness too long. River turned, studying her pale face. Ain't no imposition. Besides, you're not strong enough yet. I can manage. She struggled to her feet again, stubbornness lending her strength. I appreciate everything you've done, but nothing. River's voice remained gentle, but firm. Storms passed, but there's 4 feet of snow out there. You wouldn't make it half a mile. Alaya ignored him, taking unsteady steps toward the door. Her bandaged hands fumbled with the latch before she managed to push it open. The bright sunlight and bitter cold hit her like a physical blow. She made it 3 steps into the snow before her legs buckled. River was there instantly, catching her before she fell face first, into a drift. Without a word, he lifted her and carried her back inside, kicking the door shut behind them. That prove anything? He asked, settling her back on the cot. Alaya's face burned with frustration and shame. I'm sorry, I can't stay here forever. It's not right. River pulled a chair close and sat, his expression serious but kind. No one's asking for forever, but you need time to heal proper. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And maybe it's time you told me what you're running from. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. Finally, Alaya's shoulders slumped. My name is Alaya Bell, she said softly. I killed my husband in Elk Crossing 3 weeks ago. River didn't react beyond a slight nod, waiting for her to continue. He was a cruel man. Her voice wavered but grew stronger as she spoke. I thought I could change him when we married. Foolish girl's dream. He'd beat me for the smallest things. Burning supper, speaking to other men in town, even reading my Bible. Her bandaged hands twisted in her lap. That last night, he'd been drinking. He came at me with the poker from the fire, saying he'd teach me once and for all about being an obedient wife. She drew a shaky breath. His pistol was on the table. I'd never even held a gun before, but somehow I grabbed it. He laughed at first, didn't think I'd dare. When he lunged at me with the poker, I pulled the trigger. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I ran. Didn't even take a coat. Just ran until I couldn't anymore. Would have died in that storm if you hadn't found me. River stood and moved to the fireplace, adding another log before speaking. We all got ghosts, he said quietly. Mine just wear different faces. Alaya wiped her eyes with the edge of a bandage. The law won't see it that way. They'll hang me for murder. Maybe. River returned to his chair. But you can't go nowhere till spring thaw anyway. Passes are all blocked now. He studied her face. Stay here till then. Get your strength back. When the snow melts, I'll help you figure something out. I can't ask that of you. Ain't asking. I'm offering. He gestured around the cabin. Place ain't much, but it's warm and dry. Could use some help too, if you're willing. Clothes need mending, fire needs tending, and I ain't much of a cook. Alaya looked around the sparse cabin, taking in the stack of worn clothes by the door, the dwindling pile of firewood, the simple provisions on the shelves. I can do those things, she said slowly. It's the least I could offer in return. Then it settled. River stood and moved to the stove. Hungry? She nodded, managing a small smile. Yes, actually. He began preparing a simple supper of beans and dried venison, while Alaya watched from her cot. The familiar domestic sounds filled the cabin, the clank of the cookpot, the snap of the fire, the whisper of wind, under the eaves. Thank you, she said softly as he handed her a tin plate. For everything. River just nodded, settling into his chair with his own plate. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The next few days settled into a routine. Each morning, River helped Elia walk a little further, from the cot to the door, then to the woodpile, and finally short ventures outside when the weather allowed. Her hands remained bandaged, but she insisted on helping with small tasks, stirring the cooking pot, folding blankets, sorting dried herbs. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew comfortable. River would leave to check his trap lines, returning with rabbits or the occasional grouse. Elia would have coffee waiting, and they'd work side by side preparing the game, him skinning and cleaning, her seasoning and cooking. One afternoon, River returned to find Elia sitting by the fire, one of his torn shirts in her lap. She'd managed to thread a needle despite her bandaged fingers and was carefully mending a split seam. "Ain't got to do that," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "I want to," she replied, not looking up from her stitching. "Keeping busy helps me think less." River understood that all too well. He'd chosen this solitary life for similar reasons. The constant work of survival left little time for darker thoughts. As the days passed, Elia grew stronger. The bandages came off her hands, revealing pink, healing skin. She could walk the length of the cabin without support, though long distances still tired her. She took over more of the daily tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending, while River tended his trap lines and kept them supplied with firewood. They became reluctant companions, each respecting the other's silence while finding comfort in shared work. Sometimes in the evenings, River would read from his Bible, and Elia would listen, her eyes closed but her lips moving silently with familiar verses. One night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Elia spoke up. "I was a preacher's daughter, you know, back in Missouri." She smiled sadly. "Married Thomas despite my father, who said he saw darkness in him. Should have listened." River set aside his coffee cup. "Can't change what's done. Can only move forward. Is that why you're up here alone?" She looked at him directly. "Moving forward from something?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Used to scout for the army. Saw things. Did things. That can't be undone. Figured the mountains were as good a place as any to try to make peace with it." Elia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And have you? Made peace?" "Some days more than others." He stirred the fire. "Learning that peace ain't always what we think it should be. Sometimes it's just finding a way to live with what we've done." They fell silent again, watching the flames dance. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by its pack. The sound no longer frightened Elia, as it had in those first fever-filled days. Their agreement to coexist until spring thaw marked a turning point. Though neither spoke of it directly, they began to plan for the longer term. River showed Elia how to bank the fire to last through the night, which herbs worked best for healing, how to tell when a storm was coming by watching the sky. In return, she brought small comforts to the cabin. The smell of fresh bread when she found yeast among his supplies, curtains made from an old blanket, a broom fashioned from pine branches that kept the floor cleaner than it had been in years. They were an unlikely pair. The mountain hermit and the preacher's daughter turned fugitive, yet somehow they'd found a way to share this space, each offering what they could, while respecting the other's wounds. As River watched Elia move about the cabin one evening, humming softly while she stirred the soup pot, he realized something had shifted. The cabin no longer felt like a place of exile, but rather a shelter, not just from the winter storms, but from the ghosts that haunted them both. The days stretched like honey from a jar, slow and sweet, as January settled into February. Morning light found River and Elia developing routines that fit together like well-worn puzzle pieces. She rose first, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. He'd returned from checking the nearest trap line, snow dusting his shoulders, to find the cabin warm and welcoming. "Time you learned to split kindling proper," River announced one crisp morning after watching Alaya struggle with 2 large logs. "Can't have you wearing yourself out fighting with wood when there's better ways." Alaya wiped her brow with her sleeve, frustration evident in her flushed cheeks. "I reckon you're right. These pieces are giving me more trouble than they're worth." River retrieved his smaller axe from the tool chest, testing its edge with his thumb. "First rule is to let the tool do the work. You're fighting too hard." He demonstrated, his movements precise and practiced. The kindling split clean and straight, falling into neat pieces beside the chopping block. Alaya watched intently, noting how he positioned his hands, the angle of the blade. "Your turn," he said, offering her the axe handle. Her first attempts were clumsy, the axe glancing off the wood. River stood behind her, adjusting her grip. "Like this," he said quietly. "Keep your back straight. Let the weight of the head do the work." Slowly, she found the rhythm. The satisfying crack of splitting wood became a morning melody, accompanied by chickadees calling from the pine branches above. When she successfully split 10 pieces in a row, pride bloomed across her face. "Well done," River nodded, approval warming his usual stoic expression. The lessons continued as the days passed. River showed her how to clean his rifles, explaining each step with patience. "A dirty weapon's more dangerous than no weapon at all," he said, demonstrating how to run the cleaning rod through the barrel. Alaya's hands, once soft from her town life, grew calloused and strong. She learned to check the trap lines closest to the cabin, bringing back rabbits with growing confidence. River taught her to set snares, showing her how to read animal signs in the snow. "See here?" He pointed to tiny tracks crossing the white expanse. "Rabbits been through regular. They're creatures of habit. Use the same paths over and over." Alaya knelt beside him, studying the delicate impressions. "Like people, I suppose. We all fall into our patterns." River glanced at her, catching the shadow that crossed her face. "Difference is, we can choose to make new ones." In return for these lessons in survival, Alaya transformed the cabin. She discovered a forgotten broom in the lean-to and attacked the dirt with vigor. Corners that hadn't seen attention in years were swept clean. She washed the windows with melted snow, letting in more light. The tin plates and cups gleamed from regular scouring with sand. Most remarkably, she brought music back into River's life. It started one evening as she worked at mending his spare shirt. Almost unconsciously, she began humming a hymn. "Amazing Grace," her voice soft but clear in the cabin's quiet. River's hands stilled on the trap wire he was mending. The tune transported him to long-ago Sundays, to a small white church where his mother had sung in the choir. He hadn't thought of that in years. Alaya noticed his stillness and stopped, uncertain. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." "No," he said quickly. "It's fine. Been a while since I heard that one." She smiled tentatively and began again, this time singing the words quietly. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." To both their surprise, River's deep voice joined hers on the next line. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The harmony filled the cabin, rough but sincere. When the verse ended, they sat in comfortable silence, both touched by the unexpected moment of connection. "My ma used to sing in church," River said finally, "every Sunday, rain or shine. Said music was God's way of reminding us he was listening." "My father said the same," Alaya replied softly. "Even when he was angriest with me, he never tried to stop me singing in the choir." That evening marked a change. Hymns became part of their routine, filling the cabin as they worked. River remembered more than he'd thought possible, old songs of praise and redemption that had been buried beneath years of silence. The simple tasks of survival took on new rhythm. Hauling water from the creek became easier with a song to match their steps. Even the endless chore of splitting wood felt lighter when accompanied by an old spiritual. River found himself rediscovering prayer, too. Small whispered thanks before sleep, for surviving another day, for full traps, for clear skies, for the strange peace he'd found in sharing his solitude. He hadn't thought to be grateful for company, having chosen isolation as his penance. Yet Eliah's presence had somehow eased the weight of his past, rather than adding to it. Their days fell into comfortable patterns. Mornings began with coffee and Bible readings, River's voice rough but steady as he worked through the Psalms. Then came the shared work of survival, checking traps, splitting wood, hauling water. Eliah learned to patch leather and sharpen knives, while River discovered he hadn't forgotten how to smile. One particularly cold afternoon, they worked together skinning rabbits from the trap line. Eliah's hands moved surely now, no longer hesitating at the task. "Never thought I'd be doing this?" she mused, setting aside a cleaned pelt. "When I was young, I thought my life would be all church socials and teaching Sunday school." "Life has its own ideas sometimes," River replied, reaching for another rabbit. "That it does." She was quiet for a moment, working. "You know, I used to be angry at God, for letting Thomas fool everyone, for letting him hurt me, for making me—" She swallowed hard. "Making me kill him." River set down his knife, giving her his full attention. "But being here," she continued, "learning to survive, hearing these old hymns again, it's like finding pieces of myself I thought were lost for good. Maybe God had a purpose in leading me here after all." "Could be," River said softly. "Been wondering that myself." The short winter days passed in a blend of work and quiet companionship. Each evening, as darkness fell early and sharp, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked, careful conversations that skirted the edges of their deeper wounds. Other times they simply shared the silence, finding comfort in the presence of another soul who understood the weight of regret. Outside their cabin walls, the wilderness held its winter court. Moonlight turned the snow-covered clearing to silver. Wolf song echoed through the trees, while owls glided silent as shadows through the branches. Inside, warmth and hope grew like tender shoots reaching for spring sunshine. One night, after Eliah had retired to her cot, River stood at the window. The moon hung full and bright, casting blue shadows across the snow. He watched his breath fog the glass and whispered, for the first time in years, "Thank you, Lord, for sending her, for giving me a chance to help someone instead of harm them, for showing me there might be mercy left in this world after all." The moonlight seemed to brighten in response, turning the snow to diamonds. River stood there a long while, feeling something shift inside him, like ice breaking up on a river after a long freeze. In her cot, Eliah hummed softly in her sleep, an old hymn of forgiveness and grace. The winter weeks stretched on like a slow-moving river. As Eliah and River settled into their shared routine, the walls between them began to soften. Trust grew in small moments, passing tools without speaking, anticipating each other's movements around the cabin's tight space, sharing comfortable silences by the evening fire. One particularly cold evening, after they'd finished their supper of rabbit stew, Eliah sat mending a torn shirt while River cleaned his rifle. The fire crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs heavy with snow. I reckon it's time I told you the whole truth, Alaya said suddenly, her hands stilling on the fabric. About why I was out there in that storm. River set down his cleaning rod, giving her his full attention. His silence invited her to continue. My husband, Lem Bell. Her voice caught slightly on the name. He wasn't always cruel. When I first met him, he had such dreams. Wanted to build something fine, he said. A real cattle operation. She shook her head. But the cards called him louder than any dream. River watched her fingers twist in the fabric of the shirt she held. We had a homestead, she continued. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Or it was supposed to be. I planted a garden, even had some chickens starting to lay. Her voice grew bitter. Then I found out he'd been gambling away everything we had, piece by piece. The cattle first, then the tools, finally the land itself. She set the mending aside, staring into the fire. When I'd pray at night, asking God for help, it made him angry. Said I was acting high and mighty, just like my preacher father. He'd drink, and then... She touched her cheek unconsciously, remembering. Well, the bruises always showed up where people wouldn't see them. River's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. That last night he came home wild-eyed, drunk and desperate. Said he'd found a game where he could win it all back. Wanted the last of our money, the emergency funds I'd hidden. Alaya's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. When I refused, he came at me with his knife. She drew a shaky breath. We struggled. I just wanted to keep him away, but he was so angry, so strong. Then suddenly he wasn't anymore. He'd fallen forward onto his own blade. There was so much blood. River shifted in his chair, the wood creaking softly. I ran, she continued. Didn't even pack proper. Just grabbed his pistol and fled into the night. Knew nobody would believe it was an accident. Law tends to see what it expects to see, especially with a woman like me, a preacher's daughter gone wrong. Law ain't always justice, River said quietly, his first words since she'd begun her tale. No, Alaya agreed, but they'll hang me all the same if they find me. She looked at him directly. That's why I was ready to die in that storm. Seemed cleaner somehow. River held her gaze for a long moment. Then he set his rifle aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Reckon it's fair you know my story too, since you've trusted me with yours. He stared down at his calloused hands. Used to scout for the army, had a talent for reading sign, knowing the land. They said we were bringing civilization, law, and order. His voice grew rough. What we really brought was death. Alaya watched his face in the firelight, seeing the pain etched there. Led soldiers into Apache territory, showed them the hidden waterholes, the old trails, the places where families camped. He swallowed hard. Didn't matter that many of those families just wanted peace. Command had decided they all had to go. Women, children, elders, and I... His voice caught. I showed the way. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Last raid, something broke in me. Saw a grandmother trying to shield her grandchildren. Reminded me of my own gran. He shook his head. I couldn't do it anymore. Walked away that night. Been trying to walk away ever since, but some things follow you. We all got blood we wish we could wash off, Alaya said softly. River looked up, meeting her eyes. In that moment, they recognized in each other the same burden, the weight of actions that couldn't be undone, of memories that haunted the quiet hours. The silence between them was different now, heavy with shared understanding. Outside, far down in the valley, the telegraph line hummed faintly. The sound carried on the night air, a thin wire of connection to the world they'd both fled. River stood and moved to the stove, where coffee still kept warm. He poured 2 cups, handed one to Alaya. They sat together, watching the fire burn low, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow less alone in them. The coffee's warmth spread through their hands as the wind sang its winter song outside. That humming telegraph wire seemed to whisper that the world hadn't forgotten them. For better or worse, their past lives still existed out there, beyond the snow-wrapped mountains. But here in the cabin's warmth, they'd found something neither had expected. Someone who could look at their darkest truths and still see humanity worth saving. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a step toward something like grace. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, listening to the fire's soft crackle and the distant song of the telegraph wire. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, the simple act of sharing their burdens had lightened them, if only a little. The night deepened around the cabin, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Inside, two souls who had expected to face their demons alone found unexpected comfort in shared understanding, their confessions hanging in the air like prayers waiting to be answered. The morning air bit sharp and clean as River checked his trap line. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, dusting the pine branches and smoothing the drifts into pristine white waves. He moved with practiced quiet, his snowshoes barely whispering across the surface. At his third trap, something made him pause. There, cutting across his own trail from yesterday, were boot prints he didn't recognize. He crouched down, studying them with narrowed eyes. The impressions were too clean, too fresh to belong to any mountain trapper. These were town boots, and new ones at that. River's heart quickened. He'd been a scout too long not to read the signs. Whoever made these tracks wasn't hunting game. They were hunting people. He checked the remaining traps quickly, his movements sharp and efficient now. 2 rabbits and a fox went into his game bag, but his mind stayed fixed on those strange tracks. They led toward the ridge, then back down toward the valley. Scouting patterns. Someone was searching the area systematically. The sun had barely reached its peak when River returned to the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see Alaya hanging herbs to dry from the rafters. The sight of her going about her peaceful work made his chest tighten. She'd found some measure of peace here. They both had. When he stepped inside, Alaya turned from her task, greeting him with a smile that faded as she read his expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing to fret about just yet," River said, but his actions betrayed his words as he immediately began checking their ammunition supplies. "Just some tracks I don't care for." Alaya's hands stilled on the herbs. She'd learned to read him these past weeks, to see the tension in his shoulders when something wasn't right. "What kind of tracks?" River paused, weighing how much to tell her. "Town boots, fresh ones, moving like they're looking for something." Or someone hung unspoken between them. Alaya's face paled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "Could be just travelers." "Could be," River agreed, though they both knew better. Travelers didn't scout patterns in winter. They didn't wear fine boots, and they surely didn't vanish back toward town without making camp. As evening approached, River moved with quiet purpose around the cabin. He showed Alaya how to blacken the windows with soot from the stove, leaving just enough gaps to see out while preventing anyone from seeing in. They loaded both rifles and checked the pistols. River positioned weapons near each window and door, then walked Alaya through which ones to grab depending on where trouble might come from. The cabin grew darker as they worked, shadows lengthening across the floor. When the last window was blackened, River knelt by the fireplace. In the dancing light, Alaya watched him bow his head, lips moving in silent prayer. She hadn't seen him pray openly before, and the sight stirred something in her chest, fear mixed with a strange comfort. They ate a quiet supper, both listening more to the sounds outside than speaking. The familiar night noises seemed sharper now, each crack of a branch or whisper of wind drawing their attention. When they finally slept, it was in shifts, one always awake, watching the darkness beyond their walls. Dawn broke cold and clear. River was out checking the ridge before first light, moving like a shadow through the trees. Near the highest point, where rock met sky, he found it, a spent match, its head still bright against the snow. Nearby, horse sign marked the ground where the snow had blown thin. The tracks led back down toward town, but River knew in his bones they'd return. He hurried back to the cabin, his mind already mapping escape routes, calculating supplies, marking hiding places in the deeper mountains. Inside, Alaya had breakfast waiting, hot coffee and cornbread, but neither had much appetite. "They're scouting us," River said simply, warming his hands around his coffee cup. "Found where they stopped up high, where they could see the whole valley. They had horses." Alaya's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "How many?" "2, maybe 3 horses. Professional work. They're being careful, taking their time." He looked at her steadily. "We should think about moving deeper into the mountains for a spell." But Alaya shook her head, something hardening in her eyes. "No, I've done enough running." "Alaya!" "I mean it, River." She stood, squaring her shoulders. "I ran from my father when he tried to control my life. I ran from Lem when he tried to destroy it. I even tried to run from living itself, out there in that storm." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I won't run again. If they come, I'll face what's coming." River studied her face for a long moment, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Finally, he nodded. "Then I'll face it with you." They spent the morning preparing, packing food and ammunition into bags they could grab quickly if needed. River showed Alaya how to move through the deep snow, using his extra pair of snowshoes, teaching her the paths that led to various hiding spots, caves, thickets, old mine shafts. Just because they wouldn't run didn't mean they wouldn't be ready. As the day wore on, they watched the ridge line. No more strangers appeared. The tracks from yesterday were slowly filling with fresh snow, but the threat they represented lingered like smoke in still air. River kept his rifle close, checking and rechecking their defenses. Alaya moved through her daily tasks with new awareness, noting escape routes, measuring distances to cover. Evening found them by the fire, its warmth a small comfort against the chill of uncertainty. They'd drawn the shutters tight, leaving only the thinnest gaps to watch through. Outside, the wind sang its lonely song through the pines. Inside, they sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought, but drawing strength from the other's presence. "They might not come back," Alaya said softly, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Might not," River agreed, equally doubtful. He'd seen too much of how the world worked to trust in easy endings. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Alaya pulled her, shawl tighter around her shoulders. "If they do come, if they're here for me." She took a deep breath. "You don't have to stand with me. You've already done more than anyone had cause to expect." River's face was stern in the firelight. "I reckon a man's got to stand for something in this life. Otherwise, he ain't really living at all." He checked the load in his rifle for the 100th time that day. "Besides, this cabin's as much yours now as mine." Alaya blinked back sudden tears at the simple acceptance in his words. They sat together as the fire burned low, listening to the night sounds beyond their walls. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Two souls who had found unexpected sanctuary in each other's broken places, now prepared to defend that peace they'd built. The night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. In the valley below, somewhere beyond the snow and shadows, unknown men made their plans. But here in the cabin, River and Elia kept their vigil, their shared strength a quiet defiance against whatever morning might bring. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow. Inside the cabin, Elia sat at the rough-hewn table, an old piece of paper before her. She'd found it tucked in one of River's ledgers, yellowed but clean enough for writing. The pencil trembled slightly in her hand as she began. "Dear Father, I pray this letter finds you well. It has been 3 long years since I left, and not a day passes that I don't think of you." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with her sleeve. River watched from across the room while he cleaned his rifle, pretending not to notice her struggle. He'd given her privacy when she'd asked to write, but stayed close enough to offer silent support. "I know I hurt you deeply when I married Lem against your wishes," she continued writing. "You were right about him, though not in the ways you thought. He didn't just gamble away our money and land. Her hand shook harder. "He broke more than just promises." Elia set down the pencil, pressing her palms flat against the table until they steadied. River noticed but kept his eyes on his work, giving her space to find her words. The morning light streamed through the window, casting her shadow long across the wooden floor. "The bruises he left weren't always visible," she wrote after a long pause. "But the worst pain was watching him mock my faith, tear pages from my Bible, tell me God had abandoned me. When I prayed, he'd—" She stopped again, tears falling onto the paper. River set aside his rifle and quietly stoked the fire, adding another log. The familiar crack and pop of burning wood filled the silence as Elia gathered her courage to continue. "That last night, he was worse than ever. When he came at me with the knife, I only meant to push him away. I never meant for him to fall on it. I've prayed for forgiveness every day since, both from God and from you." She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. The next words came easier, as if a weight was lifting with each confession. "I'm safe now, Father. The Lord sent someone to help me when I was ready to give up. I've found peace here in these mountains, and perhaps even a measure of grace. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you might find it in your heart to try." River watched her from the corner of his eye, his heart heavy with an unspoken burden. He remembered Reverend Bell from years ago, the fierce preacher who'd blessed the troops before they rode into Apache territory. The man's thundering voice had echoed off canyon walls as he spoke of divine justice. River had never told Elia about that dark chapter, about how her father's words had helped justify what came after. Some truths were better left buried in the past. "River has offered to deliver this letter when spring comes," Elia wrote, unaware of the connection. "I don't know if you'll want to read it, but I needed you to know the truth. I'm not that foolish girl anymore. I'm trying to find my way back to God, back to the light you always taught me to follow." She signed her name with a steady hand. "Your daughter, Elia." Folding the paper carefully, she sealed it with a drop of candle wax. River watched her press her mother's ring into the cooling wax, leaving a small flower pattern. "Will you really take it to him?" she asked softly, holding out the letter. "To the church in Elk Crossing?" River took it gently, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Come spring thaw, I'll make sure he gets it." The promise felt heavy on his tongue, knowing he'd have to face the Reverend again. But seeing the hope in Elia's eyes made it impossible to refuse. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned to the window to hide fresh tears. Throughout the week that followed, River worked in secret during the evenings after Alaya had gone to sleep. In the flickering lamplight, his knife moved steadily over a piece of pine wood he'd been saving. Slowly, a cross began to take shape beneath his careful hands. He carved it simple but elegant, smoothing each surface until it gleamed. When the last details were finished, he studied his work in the firelight. The cross wasn't fancy, no gilt or polish like church pieces, but it held an honest beauty. Like Alaya herself, he thought, then pushed the notion aside. On the 7th morning, he wrapped it in a clean cloth and waited for the right moment. He found it after breakfast, as Alaya washed the dishes in a basin by the fire. "Got something for you," he said quietly, holding out the bundle. Alaya dried her hands on her apron, curious. As she unwrapped the cloth, her breath caught. The wooden cross lay in her palms, its surface catching the morning light. She traced the smooth edges with trembling fingers. "River," her voice broke. "It's beautiful." "Figured you might want something to pray with," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with her emotion. "Noticed you ain't had proper things for worship since you came." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the cross to her chest. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Not really. Why would you do this?" River shifted his weight, choosing his words carefully. "Reckon I'm starting to," he said finally. "Know enough to see you're trying to find your way back. Sometimes folks need something to hold on to while they're searching." Alaya's tears fell faster, but her smile was radiant. She placed the cross on the windowsill where the morning light struck it, making the wood glow like honey. Her letter to her father lay beside it, waiting for spring. Outside, snow began to fall again, fat, lazy flakes that danced in the still air. They watched together as the white powder slowly accumulated on the window ledge, dusting the letter's corner. Neither spoke, but something shifted in the quiet between them, like a door opening to let in light. River thought of the letter in his pocket, of the day he'd have to face Reverend Bell again. The memory of that long-ago blessing before battle sat heavy in his chest. But watching Alaya's face as she gazed at her cross, he knew he'd find a way to deliver her words without reopening those old wounds. Some burdens were worth carrying in silence if they helped light someone else's path home. The snow continued to fall, adding another layer to the deep blanket that surrounded their cabin. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and the wooden cross caught the light, casting two shadows on the wall, one reaching toward earth, the other pointing heavenward, like a silent prayer for grace. The blizzard struck without warning, howling down from the north like a hungry wolf. River watched from the cabin door as dark clouds swallowed the afternoon sun, turning day to dusk in minutes. Snow whipped sideways, stinging his face as he secured the last of their firewood under the lean-to. Inside, Alaya counted their dwindling supplies with growing concern. "We're down to our last sack of beans," she said, her voice tight. "And the salt pork won't last more than a few days." River nodded grimly. They'd stretched their stores as far as they could, but winter had proven longer and harsher than expected. "I'll need to hunt," he said, checking his rifle's action. "Moon's near full, might be enough light to track by." In this storm, Alaya moved to the window, where wind-driven snow plastered against the glass. "It's too dangerous." "Ain't got much choice." River pulled on his heaviest coat and wound a wool scarf around his neck. "We need meat, and soon." Alaya pressed her wooden cross between her palms, a habit she'd developed since River had carved it for her. "At least wait until morning. Storm might be worse by then." He checked his powder, making sure it was dry. Better to go while I can still see the cabin from the ridge. She wanted to argue more, but knew he was right. Instead, she filled his canteen with hot coffee and pressed it into his hands. Promise you'll turn back if it gets too bad. River met her eyes for a long moment. Something flickered there, concern deeper than mere friendship, before he looked away. I promise. The cold hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. Snow had already drifted knee-deep against the cabin, and more fell in thick curtains. River pulled his scarf over his nose and started up the ridge, following a game trail he knew well. Hours passed. The promised moonlight barely penetrated the storm clouds, leaving River to navigate by instinct and memory. His fingers grew numb despite his thick gloves. Twice he found elk tracks, only to lose them in the deepening snow. Near midnight, his luck finally turned. A young bull elk emerged from the darkness 30 yards ahead, pawing through the snow for browse. River raised his rifle, steadying it against a pine trunk. The shot rang out, swallowed quickly by the howling wind. The elk dropped clean, but River's relief was short-lived. The temperature had plummeted, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. By the time he'd cleaned and quartered the meat, his hands shook so badly he could barely tie the burden straps. The return journey became a nightmare. Wind-packed snow had obscured his tracks, and the familiar landscape had transformed into alien shapes. River's clothes, wet with sweat and blood from the butchering, began to freeze. His thoughts grew sluggish as cold crept into his core. He stumbled on a hidden rock and fell, losing his grip on the meat pack. As he struggled to rise, exhaustion pulled at him like quicksand. The urge to rest, just for a moment, was almost overwhelming. River recognized the danger through his mental fog. This was how men died in the mountains, giving in to cold's false comfort. Keep moving, he mumbled through numb lips. Keep moving. Something flickered through the curtain of snow. Lamplight. River blinked, unsure if it was real or a dying man's vision. But it steadied him, gave him a bearing to follow. One step at a time, he forced himself toward that distant glow. Alaya had kept watch at the window all night, feeding the fire until the cabin blazed with warmth. When she spotted River's dark shape emerging from the storm, she ran outside without stopping for a coat. He was swaying on his feet, face white with frost. Lord have mercy, she breathed, grabbing his arm. Come on, lean on me. Together they stumbled inside. River collapsed beside the hearth, shivering violently. Alaya worked quickly, stripping off his frozen clothes and wrapping him in every blanket they owned. She retrieved the meat pack he'd somehow managed to hold on to, setting it aside for later. You're burning up, she said, touching his forehead. Fever blazed beneath the skin, though his hands remained ice cold. She'd seen this before. The dangerous combination of cold and exhaustion that could kill even strong men. Alaya heated their last pot of broth and helped River. Drink it slowly. Through the night, she tended him as he had once tended her, bathing his face with cool cloths when the fever spiked, praying over him when his breathing grew labored. In his delirium, River began to mumble. Broken phrases at first, then clearer words as memories took hold. Should have known. They'd send us after women and children, not just warriors. Alaya listened, her heart aching as River's buried guilt poured out. He spoke of an Apache camp, of how he'd guided soldiers there years ago, how the commanding officer had ignored his protests when they discovered it was mainly families. Could have warned them somehow, he whispered hoarsely. Could have fired wide, made noise, given them time to run. His hands clutched at the blankets. Their screams, still hear them. Shh, Alaya soothed, wiping his brow. That's past now. You're a different man than you were. Blood on my hands. River's eyes opened but didn't focus, lost in fever dreams. Can't wash it clean. Then you'll save someone now, Alaya whispered, taking his cold hands between her warm ones. You already have. You saved me when I was ready to die. She pressed her lips to his fingers, tasting salt. I forgive you, River. God forgives you. Through the long hours before dawn, she kept her vigil. Sometimes River would grow restless, trying to rise as if to flee his memories. Alaya would sing hymns then, soft and low, until he settled. Other times he lay so still she had to check his breathing, fear clutching at her throat, until she felt its steady rhythm. Morning came with blessed quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside glazed with ice and new snow. River's fever broke with the dawn. He woke slowly, awareness returning to his eyes as they found Alaya dozing in a chair beside him. You stayed, he said softly. She started awake, relief flooding her face. Of course I stayed. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. How could I do otherwise? River looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. Something had changed between them during the night's vigil. A barrier fallen, a truth acknowledged without words. Love flickered in their shared glance, warm as the hearth fire, though neither spoke it aloud. Alaya helped him sit up, supporting him as he drank water. The elk meat, he remembered suddenly. Need to salt it. It's done, she assured him. I took care of it while you slept. We won't go hungry now. River nodded, studying her face, the shadows beneath her eyes, the worry lines only now beginning to ease. She'd saved his life, just as he'd once saved hers. The symmetry of it struck him deeply, this exchange of mercy between two broken souls seeking redemption. Outside, the morning sun struck crystal fire from the ice-coated trees. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and unspoken feeling. They had survived the storm together, and in doing so, forged something precious and new, a bond tempered by shared sacrifice and mutual forgiveness. Alaya rose to stir the fire, her hand slipping reluctantly from his. River watched her move about the cabin, seeing her with fresh eyes. She was no longer the desperate woman he'd found in the snow, and he was no longer the solitary man who'd saved her. They had remade each other, slowly and quietly, through acts of grace both given and received. The day stretched before them, bright with possibility. Neither spoke of love, but it lived in every shared glance, every careful touch, every moment of comfortable silence. For now, that was enough. The first signs of spring came subtly to the high country. Icicles along the cabin's eaves grew longer, dripping steadily in the warming sun. The packed snow developed a glassy crust that crackled underfoot. River noticed the changes during his morning checks of the trap line, marking how the days stretched longer and the light grew stronger. One morning, he woke to the sound of rushing water. The creek that had slept silent beneath winter's blanket now roared with snowmelt, swollen and swift. The noise drew both him and Alaya outside after breakfast, where they stood watching nature's transformation. Never seen the water so angry, Alaya said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. River nodded, scanning the banks where brown water churned against ice shelves. Spring flood's coming early this year. Need to move the traps higher or we'll lose them. They spent the morning salvaging what they could. River showed Alaya how to read the signs of rising water, teaching her which banks would hold and which would crumble. Together they hauled beaver traps from the creek bed, reset them on higher ground where the animals would follow the warming trend. See here. River pointed to fresh tooth marks on a fallen aspen. Beaver's already scouting new territory. They know spring's coming better than we do. Elia studied the marks, then glanced at River with a slight smile. You sound different when you talk about the land. More alive. He ducked his head, but she caught the pleased look in his eyes. These days, he couldn't seem to hide much from her. Months of shared space had taught them to read each other's smallest gestures. Back at the cabin, they took inventory of their winter stores. The elk meat River had nearly died bringing home was holding well, but their other supplies needed replenishing. River began planning hunting trips to restock before the spring storms hit. I'll help, Elia said firmly when he mentioned going out alone. My hands are strong now and I know how to shoot. She flexed her fingers, long healed from frostbite. You taught me well enough. River started to protest, then stopped himself. She was right. She'd grown capable during their months together, learning every skill he'd shared. More than that, she'd proven herself his equal in determination and grit. Reckon you have it that, he said finally. We'll go tomorrow if the weather holds. That evening, Elia attempted to bake biscuits using the last of their flour. The results were less than perfect, golden on top but black as coal on the bottom. She stared at them in dismay while River tried to keep a straight face. Go ahead and laugh, she said, fighting a smile herself. They're awful. River picked up one of the scorched biscuits, turning it over in his hands. Reminds me of my first try at cooking. Made hardtack so tough it nearly broke my partner's tooth. Elia's laughter, bright and unexpected, filled the cabin. Soon River joined in, and they sat there at the rough-hewn table, sharing burned biscuits and stories of past cooking disasters. The simple joy of it caught them both by surprise. Later, while Elia washed dishes, River disappeared into his workroom. The sound of sawing and planing drifted through the cabin walls. When she finished cleaning, curiosity drew her to investigate. She found him surrounded by wood shavings, carefully shaping chair spindles from seasoned pine. A half-finished seat frame leaned against the wall. What's this? She asked, though something in her heart already knew. River kept working, his hand steady on the plane. Figured the hearth could use another chair, for company. The simple words carried weight far beyond their meaning. Elia touched one of the smooth spindles, feeling the care in its crafting. It's beautiful work. Won't be anything fancy, River said gruffly. Just somewhere comfortable to sit. But they both knew it was more than that. It was a declaration of sorts, an acknowledgement that their shared life had grown into something neither had expected. The second chair meant permanence, meant belonging. It meant no more lonely evenings by the fire. That night, after the dishes were dried, and the new chair parts carefully stored, they sat in their usual places by the hearth. The fire had burned low, casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, the creek's voice rose and fell like distant music. Would you pray with me? Elia asked quietly. She'd prayed alone each night since coming to the cabin, but never asked River to join her. She wasn't sure what made her ask now, except that it felt right. River hesitated only a moment before nodding. They bowed their heads together, and Elia's clear voice filled the peaceful silence. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, for the coming of spring and the promise it brings. Thank you for this shelter, for the food that sustains us. She paused, then continued softly, and thank you especially for this mountain man who refused to let me die, who showed me your mercy when I'd forgotten it existed. River's breath caught at her words. Something long frozen inside him began to thaw, like ice breaking up on the creek. When Elia's hand found his, he gripped it tightly. Amen, he whispered, the word rough with emotion. They sat quietly after that, watching the fires dance. Neither felt the need to speak. The prayer had said, "Everything necessary." Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild songs echoing off the mountainsides. River found himself studying Alaya's profile in the firelight. The haunted look she'd worn when he first found her had softened into something gentler. She'd grown stronger here in the high country, but it was more than physical strength. She'd found her spirit again, her faith. And somehow, watching her heal had begun to heal him too. For the first time in years, life seemed possible again. Not just survival, but real living, with purpose and joy and connection. The realization settled over him like a warm blanket, comfortable and right. Alaya must have felt something of his thoughts, for she turned to meet his gaze. The tenderness in her eyes matched the feeling in his heart. Without words, they both understood. This shared faith, this growing love between them, was changing everything. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Inside the cabin, two souls who had once been lost found anchor in each other's presence. The second chair would soon stand ready beside the hearth, a symbol of the future they were building together. Spring was coming to the mountains, bringing with it the promise of renewal. And in that promise, River and Alaya found hope blooming as surely as the wildflowers that would soon carpet the meadows below. The evening deepened around them, peaceful and complete. They remained by the fire, hands clasped, sharing the quiet joy of two people who had found their way home. The morning dawned crisp and bright, frost glittering on new grass, pushing through melting snow. River stood at the cabin door, breathing in the promise of spring. These quiet moments had become precious to him, watching the sun paint gold across the valley while coffee burbled on the stove inside. The crack of a distant rifle shattered the silence. River stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. Another shot echoed off the ridgeline, closer this time. Through years of mountain living, he'd learned to read gunfire like others read tracks. These weren't hunting shots. Too rapid, too purposeful. He slipped inside where Alaya stood frozen by the stove, coffee pot forgotten in her hand. "Riders coming," he said quietly. 6, maybe 7, by the sound. Her face went pale. "How do you know?" "Snow's soft enough to muffle hoofbeats. They're shooting to flush any lookouts." He moved to the window, staying behind the frame as he scanned the approach. Through morning mist, he caught the glint of rifle barrels, the dark shapes of men on horseback picking their way up the trail. There. He counted 6 riders in dust-coated clothing, moving with the practiced formation of men who'd ridden together before. The leader's badge caught the sun, a sheriff's star. Alaya peered past his shoulder, then jerked back with a sharp intake of breath. "That's Lyle," she whispered. "Sheriff Burroughs. He and Lem were partners before everything." River's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough corrupt lawmen to know the type. "Root cellar, now." But no time to argue. He was already moving, lifting the trap door hidden beneath the bearskin rug. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Don't come up till I call you." Alaya hesitated only a moment before descending the rough ladder into darkness. River lowered the door just as hoofbeats became audible outside. He kicked the rug back in place, then grabbed his coffee cup and settled into his chair by the cold hearth, forcing his posture into careful casualness. Heavy boots thumped on the porch. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door. "Come in," River called, taking a deliberate sip of coffee. Sheriff Lyle Burroughs filled the doorway, flanked by 2 deputies. He was a tall man with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. His badge gleamed new, unlike his trail-worn clothes. "Morning," Burrows said pleasantly. "Hope we're not disturbing your breakfast?" River shrugged. "Coffee's still hot if you're wanting some." "Much obliged, but we're hunting rustlers. Followed their trail this far up the valley." Burrows' gaze swept the cabin's interior. "Mind if we look around?" "Suit yourself." River didn't move from his chair as the deputies began searching, their spurs jangling against the floorboards. He kept his eyes on Burrows, who studied him with predatory interest. "You live up here alone, mister?" "Hale, River Hale. And yes, just me and the quiet." Burrows nodded thoughtfully. "Must get lonely, all by yourself in winter." "Suits me fine." "I'm sure it does." The sheriff's smile widened slightly. "Though I hear tell some folks find company in unexpected places, especially those looking to disappear for a while." River met his gaze steadily. "Can't say I've noticed any such folk." "No." Burrows pulled off his gloves slowly. "That's interesting, because we've been tracking a fugitive, murder suspect, young woman, pretty thing with dark hair." He paused. "Ring any bells?" "Can't help you there," one of the deputies called from the back room. "Clear here, Sheriff." "Keep looking," Burrows ordered, never taking his eyes off River. "Mighty clean cabin for a mountain man living alone." River sipped his coffee. "My mama raised me right." A bark of laughter from Burrows, sharp as a gunshot. "That she must have. Say, you wouldn't mind if we checked your outbuildings, just to be thorough." "Help yourself." River's voice remained neutral, though his fingers tightened on the cup. "Though I should mention, got a mama bear denned up behind the woodshed. Might want to give her space." Burrows studied him for a long moment, that cold smile still playing at his lips. Finally, he called to his men. "Boys, let's check outside. Carefully." They filed out, boots thumping on the porch boards. River listened to them moving around the cabin, checking the lean-to, the woodpile, the small barn where he kept his mule. Through it all, he sat perfectly still, aware of every creak from the root cellar below. Burrows returned alone, leaning in the doorway. "Well, Mr. Hale, seems you're living just as solitary as you claim." He adjusted his gun belt. "Though I got to say, you seem awful quiet. In my experience, men that quiet usually got something to hide. Just the way I am." "Maybe so." Burrows straightened. "We'll be moving on, but I reckon we might pass this way again. You see any sign of that fugitive I mentioned, you'll let me know." River nodded once. "If I see anything worth reporting." "Much obliged." Burrows touched his hat brim, that cold smile still in place. "You have yourself a pleasant day now." River waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before moving. He checked the windows, watching the posse disappear down the trail. Only then did he lift the trap door. "They're gone." Elia emerged, shaking with tension. "He knows. Lyle knows I'm here. I could tell by his voice." "Yes." River was already moving, pulling supplies from shelves. "We need to leave, now." "Where will we go?" "High country. I know places they won't follow." He tossed her a pack. "Take only what you need. Food, warm clothes, ammunition." They worked quickly, gathering essentials. River added his tools, trade goods, and the few treasures he couldn't bear to leave: his father's watch, his mother's Bible. Elia packed similar treasures: her father's letters, the wooden cross River had carved her. Within 20 minutes, they had the mule loaded. River took a final look around the cabin that had been his home for 5 years. So many memories in these walls, and now, like smoke, they would drift away. "Ready?" he asked Elia. She nodded, shouldering her pack. Her face was set with determination. though fear shadowed her eyes. They headed out, River leading the mule while Alaya brought up the rear. The spring mud made for slow going, but River kept them moving steadily upward, following game trails toward the high ridge. He chose their path carefully, using every trick he knew to obscure their tracks. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the peaks. River pushed them harder, knowing they needed shelter before the storm hit. They were nearly to the tree line when Alaya grabbed his arm. "Look," he turned. Below them, a column of smoke rose from the valley, from the direction of his cabin. Even at this distance, they could see the flames beginning to catch. "Lyle," Alaya whispered. "He's sending a message." River watched his home burn, his expression grim. "He thought I was too quiet to trust. Wanted to make sure we couldn't come back." "I'm so sorry," Alaya's voice broke. "This is my fault. Everything you've lost." "Stop!" River turned to her, his eyes intense. "What's lost is just wood and nails. What matters is right here." He touched her shoulder gently. "We keep moving forward. That's all we can do." A raindrop struck his cheek, then another. The storm was coming. "There's a cave system up ahead," River said, adjusting the mule's lead rope. "We'll shelter there tonight, plan our next move." They pushed on as the rain began in earnest, the smoke from the burning cabin disappearing into gathering darkness behind them. The peace of their mountain sanctuary was shattered, but they were together. For now, that would have to be enough. Thunder rolled across the peaks as they climbed higher, leaving the valley and their pursuers behind. Somewhere ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and hope. But the immediate future held only rain, rough ground, and the need to survive one more night. River glanced at Alaya as she walked beside him, her steps sure despite the treacherous footing. She caught his look and managed a small smile. They didn't need words to understand each other anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm deepened around them as they made their way toward shelter, two figures moving through the gathering dusk, while below, the remains of River's cabin smoldered in the rain. The mountain dawn brought no comfort. River and Alaya broke camp before first light, loading the mule with practiced silence. They'd barely slept, taking turns watching for pursuit while spring winds moaned through the firs. Now, gray clouds threatened more rain as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. River led them off any recognizable path, choosing instead to follow game trails and natural breaks in the vegetation. His boots left minimal marks in the wet earth, and he taught Alaya to step where he stepped, showing her how to move without disturbing branches or leaving obvious signs. "Like tracking in reverse," he explained quietly, helping her across a particularly treacherous stretch of scree. "We're trying not to leave a story behind us." Alaya nodded, her face drawn with exhaustion, but determined. She hadn't complained once, though River could see the toll their flight was taking. Her hands, still tender from frostbite, gripped the mule's lead rope until the knuckles showed white. By midday, they'd climbed high enough that patches of snow still lingered in the shadows. River called a brief halt, sharing dried meat and the last of their bread. They sat with their backs against a fallen log, watching the valley below for any sign of movement. "I never meant for this to happen," Alaya said suddenly, her voice thick with guilt. "Your home, your life there, all destroyed because of me." River turned to study her face. Shadow and sunlight played across her features, highlighting the worry lines around her eyes. "That cabin was just a place to hide," he said finally. "Wasn't really living there, just existing. But still, no." He touched her hand briefly, surprising them both. You gave me reason to do more than exist, reminded me what it means to help someone, to have purpose again. His voice roughened. Been a long time since I felt that. Alaya's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. We should keep moving. They traveled through the afternoon, River choosing their route carefully. He avoided the easier paths, knowing Sheriff Burroughs would expect them to take familiar trails. Instead, they picked their way through dense thickets and across rocky slopes, making their passage as difficult to follow as possible. The mule, usually steady, grew nervous as they crossed a narrow ledge. River spoke softly to the animal, stroking its neck until it calmed. Easy now. Slow and sure gets us there. Alaya watched him with the animal, noting how his gentle touch belied his weathered appearance. This man who had once guided soldiers now guided her to safety, his quiet strength a constant anchor. As evening approached, they found a sheltered grove of fir trees. River began setting up camp while Alaya gathered firewood, moving carefully to avoid leaving obvious trails. The routine they'd developed in the cabin transferred seamlessly to the wilderness, each knowing their tasks, working in comfortable silence. We'll take turns watching, River said as he built a small, smokeless fire. 2 hours each. I'll take first shift. Alaya nodded, but worry creased her brow. What if they're still tracking us? They'll expect us to head for towns or settlements. River arranged branches to create a lean-to. We're doing the opposite. These mountains, they're like a maze if you don't know them, and I know them better than most. They shared a meager supper of dried beans and jerky. The night settled around them, bringing a chorus of cricket song and the distant cry of an owl. River took his position at the edge of their camp, rifle across his knees, while Alaya tried to rest beneath their single blanket. Sleep proved elusive. After an hour, she sat up, watching River's silhouette against the starlit sky. I can't sleep anyway, she whispered. Might as well take my turn now. He didn't argue, simply handed her the rifle and showed her how to brace it comfortably. Then he hesitated, looking down at her in the darkness. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For trusting me. Back in the snow when I found you. You could have shot me. Maybe should have, being careful as you needed to be. But you trusted instead. Alaya's throat tightened with emotion. God sent you to me that day. I believe that now, though I didn't want to then. River's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently before he moved to the lean-to. Soon his breathing deepened into sleep, leaving Alaya alone with her thoughts and the vast mountain night. The second day brought more careful travel, more watching over their shoulders. River's experience showed in every decision, choosing rocky ground that held no tracks, using streams to wash away their scent, keeping to shadows and natural cover whenever possible. By the third day, exhaustion began to take its toll. Alaya's right foot, still healing from its earlier frostbite, grew increasingly painful. She said nothing, but River noticed her limping and called an early halt near a half-frozen creek. We rest here, he said firmly when she tried to protest. No sense pushing until you can't walk at all. He built another lean-to, this time taking extra care to conceal it among a stand of young firs. While Alaya soaked her foot in the cold creek, River gathered springy boughs to create a bed of sorts, laying their blanket over it. As darkness fell, he did something that surprised her. He knelt openly and prayed aloud. Lord, his voice was rough but sincere, we need your protection now. Been a long time since I asked proper, but I'm asking now. Watch over us through this night. Guide our steps tomorrow. And, he paused, thank you for sending her my way, even if it brought trouble with it. Alaya's heart swelled at his words. She joined him in prayer, their voices mingling in the gathering dusk. When they finished, neither moved for a long moment, the peace of it holding them still. The night air grew sharp with frost. They huddled together beneath their single blanket, sharing warmth out of necessity. But there was tenderness, too, unspoken but real, in the way River tucked the blanket around her shoulders, and how Alaya rested her head against his chest. "I never expected to find this," she whispered into the darkness. "Find what?" "Someone I could trust completely. Someone who would—" She struggled for words. "Who would carry me through the snow when I wanted to die. Who would teach me to live again." River's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Never expected to find someone worth changing for," he admitted quietly. "Someone who'd make me want to be more than just a man hiding from his past." They lay silent for a while, listening to the creek's soft murmur and the wind in the firs. So much remained unsaid between them, deeper feelings that neither dared name yet, hope and fear tangled together like the branches above them. "Whatever comes," River said finally, "we face it together." Alaya's hand found his in the darkness. "Together," she agreed softly. They dozed fitfully, taking turns at watch through the long night hours. The creek sang its endless song, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote called to its mate. Above their hidden shelter, stars wheeled across the sky, witnessing their transformation from two lonely souls into something stronger, partners bound by trust, faith, and growing love. Dawn would bring new challenges, more miles to cover, more dangers to face. But for now, in their rough camp beneath the firs, they had found something precious, the certainty that neither would face those challenges alone. Dawn painted the sky in gentle pinks when the first shot cracked through the mountain air. River jerked awake, his hand already reaching for his rifle. Alaya's eyes flew open, wide with terror. "Stay down," River whispered, but it was too late. Dark shapes emerged from the tree line. 6 riders materialized. From the morning mist, their guns already drawn. Sheriff Lyle Burrows sat tall in his saddle, a cruel smile playing across his face. River's first shot caught one of the posse's horses in the shoulder, sending its rider tumbling. His second shot splintered a tree trunk near Lyle's head. But the odds were impossible, 6 guns against 1. "That's enough heroics, mountain man," Lyle called out, his voice carrying clear across the small clearing. "Drop the rifle or we drop you both right here." River kept firing, each shot carefully placed. The old single-action revolver spoke 3 more times, forcing the posse to scatter for cover. But they were closing in, circling wider through the trees. "River, please!" Alaya begged, seeing the futility. "Don't die for me!" A bullet whizzed past River's ear. Another caught his sleeve. When his gun clicked empty, rough hands seized him from behind. 2 men wrestled him to the ground, while a third kicked the rifle away. Alaya tried to run, but made it only 3 steps before Lyle caught her arm. She struggled against his grip as he dragged her back to the center of the camp. "Well, well," Lyle sneered, twisting her arm until she gasped. "The murderess and her protector, quite a pair you make." He turned to River, who lay bleeding from a cut above his eye where they'd struck him. "You know what she is? Killed her own husband in cold blood." "That's a lie," Alaya spat. "Lem fell on his own knife. You know that, Lyle. You were his partner in every crooked game." Lyle's hand cracked across her face. "Careful now. Wouldn't want to add slander to your crimes." He looked at River again, his smile widening. "And you. I remember hearing about you. The scout who led soldiers straight to that Apache camp. How many women and children died that day, Indian killer?" River said nothing, but his eyes burned with a dangerous light. One of the men holding him shifted nervously. "Bind him," Lyle ordered. "Extra tight. He's going to have a long walk back to Elk Crossing. They used River's own rope, wrapping it cruel tight around his wrists. The other end they tied to Lyle's saddle horn. Alaya they forced onto a spare horse, her hands bound to the pommel. The rain started as they descended from the mountains. Cold drops pelted them mercilessly as the posse drove their prisoners down muddy trails. River stumbled often, dragged through puddles when he couldn't keep his feet. Each time he fell, Alaya's heart clenched, but her captors wouldn't let her help him. The journey stretched across 2 miserable days. The rain never ceased, turning the world to a gray blur of mud and suffering. River's clothes were torn to shreds, his skin raw from falling. Still, he kept moving, kept praying under his breath, not for himself, but for Alaya. She rode in numb silence, her eyes distant. The woman who had found her strength in River's cabin seemed to fade with each mile, replaced by someone hollow and ghost-like. Only when they stopped to make camp did any life return to her face. Watching River collapse in the mud, she wept silently until one of the guards cuffed her and told her to be quiet. By the second evening, River was barely conscious. His prayers had become whispered fragments, but Alaya could still make out her name among them. He was praying for her survival, for mercy she didn't believe would come. The rain drowned out all other sounds, the horses' hooves, the men's crude jokes, even Lyle's occasional taunts. It wrapped them in a world of endless gray, where hope seemed as distant as the sun. All that remained was the muddy trail to Elk Crossing, and whatever justice waited at its end. Through it all, Alaya kept her eyes on River's stumbling form. Each time he fell, she saw again the man who had carried her through the snow, who had refused to let her die. Now she could do nothing as they dragged him toward what might be his death, all because he had shown mercy to a stranger. The rain poured down, washing away their tracks, but it couldn't wash away the guilt that threatened to drown her. Her hands, bound to the saddle, clenched until her knuckles went white. She had found peace in River's cabin, found a chance at redemption. Now that peace lay shattered in the mud, and redemption seemed as far away as the mountains they'd left behind. Elk Crossing's main street hummed with whispers as 2 deputies marched Alaya toward the jailhouse. Women gathered on the boardwalk, their faces a mix of pity and judgment. Men stopped their work to stare, some touching their hats in confused respect. They remembered her as the preacher's daughter. The iron cell door clanged shut behind her. Through the barred window, she watched dust motes dance in the afternoon light, trying not to think of River. "Your father's here," Sheriff Lyle announced hours later, his boots scraping across the wooden floor. "Rode in from Carson County." Reverend Thomas Bell entered the jail like a storm cloud, his black coat dusty from travel. His face was lined with grief and something harder, the stern righteousness that had driven Alaya away years ago. "She confessed to killing Lem," Lyle told him, voice dripping false sympathy. "Murdered him in their own home." The Reverend's gray head bowed. "Then she must face judgment," he said heavily, "for her soul's sake." Across town in the livery stable, River lay on dirty straw, his body aching from the beating Lyle's men had given him. The young deputy, Elias Marsh, crept in with a canteen of fresh water. "Drink slow," Elias whispered, helping River lift his head. "There's folks here who don't buy Lyle's story. We know what kind of man Lem was." Evening settled over the town like a purple shroud. Church bells began to toll, calling the faithful to Sunday service. In his straw bed, River gathered his remaining strength and pushed himself up to sitting, ignoring the pain that flared through his ribs. Sunlight filtered through the case, courthouse's dusty windows as Elijah stood before the judge, her hands clasped tightly. One by one, townspeople took the stand, their rehearsed lies falling like stones in the hushed room. Sheriff Lyle smiled from his chair, watching his web of deception tighten. But then Martha Whitaker, a weathered farmer's wife, stepped forward. Her voice quavered but grew strong as she spoke. "I saw them that night, Sheriff Lyle and Lem Bell. They was fighting something fierce behind the saloon, shoving and cursing about money owed." Reverend Bell's stern facade cracked. He leaned forward, his shoulders tense, as doubt crept into his eyes. The courthouse doors burst open. River Hale limped down the aisle, his face bruised but determined. "I got something to say under oath," he announced, his quiet voice carrying to every corner. "This woman nursed me through fever when she could have left me to die. She brought God's grace back to a lost soul." River pulled a crumpled telegram from his shirt. "And this here proves Sheriff Lyle was blackmailing settlers. Found it in his saddlebag while he held us prisoner." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Lyle's face twisted with rage as he drew his pistol, but 3 men tackled him before he could aim. The gun clattered across the floorboards. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Charges against Elijah Bell are dismissed," he declared. "And Sheriff Lyle, you're under arrest." Reverend Thomas Bell sank to his knees before Elijah, his proud shoulders bent with grief. "My child," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I was blind. My righteousness was nothing but pride. Can you ever forgive an old fool of a father?" Elijah's tears fell as she reached for him, drawing him close. "Papa," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around his weathered neck. The years of pain and distance melted away in that embrace, father and daughter holding each other as if making up for lost time. River leaned against the courthouse rail, his injuries forgotten as he watched their reconciliation. "Seems the Lord wasn't done with either of us," he said softly, a gentle smile crossing his tired face. The next morning, sunshine streamed through the church's stained glass windows. Melting snow trickled in rivulets down the streets outside as Elijah and River stood before the altar. Their wedding was simple, but the pews filled with townspeople whose hearts had been touched by their story. Women arrived bearing fresh-baked bread, wrapped in clean cloth. Men brought packets of seed for a new beginning. Each gift spoke of welcome, of community restored. Reverend Bell's voice shook with emotion as he raised his hands over the couple. "What God has joined together," he proclaimed, joy replacing the sternness that had long marked his face. The church bells rang out across the valley, announcing not just a marriage, but a family made whole again through forgiveness and grace. Spring burst into summer, painting the foothills in waves of purple lupin and golden yarrow. Where deep snow had buried every mountain trail just months before, wildflowers now nodded in the warm breeze. The transformation seemed a mirror of the change in River and Elijah's lives. River stood back, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed the new timber house taking shape beside the upper creek. The fresh-cut pine logs, traded for his winter's catch of furs, gleamed golden in the afternoon light. He'd spent weeks hauling stone for the foundation, determined to build something solid that would last through years of mountain winters. "Looks mighty fine," called Jasper, an old trapper who'd stopped to help with the raising. "Reckon you picked the sweetest spot in the valley." River nodded, grateful for the extra hands that had made the work lighter. The creek sang nearby, promising cool water through the hottest days. Behind the house, rich soil spread toward the tree line, where Elijah had already planted her garden. Inside their temporary shelter, Elijah wrapped fresh bread in cloth, humming as she prepared meals for the men who'd helped with the building. Her father's wedding gift, a bright church bell, waited to be hung, its bronze surface catching the sun. River had promised to mount it properly once the house was finished, knowing how much it meant to her to have this piece of reconciliation. "The Lord provides," she often said, and River couldn't argue. Their larder stayed full, their door stayed open, and somehow there was always enough to share. True to their nature, travelers found their way to the homestead. Weather-beaten miners with dreams of gold, cattle drovers following the high trails, and sometimes widows with children in tow, all seeking shelter for a night or two. None left hungry, and many departed with renewed spirit after sharing prayers and stories around the evening fire. "My papa always said a house ain't Christian unless it welcomes strangers," Elia would say, ladling out extra stew or spreading fresh quilts on the floor. River watched her quiet grace with travelers, seeing how she'd transformed her own healing into comfort for others. By late summer, the house stood complete. River had built it larger than they needed, with extra sleeping space for visitors and a broad hearth that drew people close. The church bell hung proud from its tower, its clear voice carrying down the valley morning and evening, marking the rhythm of their days. Elia's garden flourished in the rich mountain soil. Rows of beans climbed their poles, while potato plants spread their leaves wide. She'd planted herbs, too, healing plants she'd learned about during their winter together, now used to ease the aches of weary travelers. One evening, as the sun painted the peaks in shades of rose and gold, the sound of hoofbeats drew River to the front gate. A lone rider sat slumped in his saddle, trail dust thick on his coat. The man's face was lined with exhaustion, his horse nearly spent from the mountain crossing. River stepped forward, steady and broad-shouldered in the fading light. His eyes, once haunted by past deeds, now held the calm certainty of a man who'd found his purpose. "You can rest here," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of his own journey from isolation to grace. Inside, Elia moved quietly, lighting the oil lamp as shadows lengthened across the floorboards. The flame caught the peace in her eyes that had once held such desperation in the snow. She glanced at River, sharing a look of understanding. They both knew what it meant to need mercy on a hard road. The stranger dismounted stiffly, touching his hat in thanks. River led the tired horse to water, while Elia set another place at the table. The lamp's warm glow spilled from the windows, a beacon of welcome in the gathering dusk. Later, as cricket song filled the evening air, River and Elia stood together by the hearth. The fire's warmth reached out like a blessing, touching the life they'd built from the ashes of their past. They were no longer mere survivors of their separate wounds. Through choice and labor, through faith restored and mercy given, they'd created something larger than themselves, a home where grace wasn't just a word, but a living truth. The church bell tolled softly in the evening breeze, its song carrying across the valley like a promise kept. Below, the creek waters flashed silver in the last light, running clear and strong like the love that had brought healing to them both. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.